evening. Certainly glad for all of you. Before we get things started, why don't we open with a word of prayer. Dear Lord and Heavenly Father, we come to you this evening. We thank you for the many blessings that you've given to us already in this day and in this week. We thank you for the health and strength that you've given us to go about our activities in this day. We thank you for health and strength. We thank you for good weather. We thank you, again, just for the many blessings that you give to us on a daily basis. We thank you, Lord, too, for Unity Christian and each of the students and families represented here. We thank you for the faculty, the staff, administration, members of the board, all those that labor here in any capacity and partner with parents and churches to help raise and train covenant children to know you as their Lord and Savior. We pray that you will bless all of the students, but in particular those that are juniors and seniors and starting to think about what does that life look like beyond high school and what is that next step. And while we realize there can be some anxiety and nervousness about what that might be, pray that you would help subside that in them, help them to continue to place their trust in you, to continue to lead and guide them as students they're trying to discern the gifts that you've given to them and how best to grow and develop them and where you are leading and calling them to go. Pray that you will bless us tonight as we discuss the college search process, financing college, just some things that are related to that as well. Again, we just pray that you would bless everyone that's here this evening, the families that are represented here, those that cannot be with us, that they might continue to place their trust in you, but that you will continue to walk alongside them in all they do. This is all we ask in your Son's name alone. Amen. So as I mentioned, Service Director of Financial Aid at Dordt University, been there now just a little bit over 9 years. But this is actually something that Dordt has done for several years. I can remember actually when my sons were students here at Unity coming to attend this event when my predecessor was putting it on. So this is something that Dordt has done for quite a while, but really just as hopefully a service to students and families, regardless of where you're looking to attend college. It is not a Dordt-specific event by any means. This is just because it's the only thing in my closet is all I have is Dordt gear. The reality is this hopefully will be information that's can be helpful for students, and it's good to see a number of students here. It's your education, it's your planning for your future. But for you as students and families, as you think about where you might be going to college, regardless if you're considering a community college, a state school, or a private university, private college. Because largely schools, colleges, timeline is going to be very similar. The process of how they do things, some of the specifics of what they do could vary a little bit from school to school. Certainly those dollar figures are going to vary a little bit from school to school, but that process is going to be largely the same. So we're going to spend a little bit of time tonight first kind of doing an overview of what that process looks like. Then we'll spend a little bit of time talking about what's known as an FSA ID. That's the username and password that students and parents will need to sign documents, to log into different websites. We'll spend most of our time talking through and looking at screenshots from the FAFSA. And hopefully those of you that were involved or maybe paying attention a little bit last year realize that for the Department of Education, as it was described once, it was not their finest hour. For us as a financial aid office, it was often like trying to hit a moving target, not knowing what to expect or when things were going to be available. And for any families that were trying to fill out the FAFSA last year, there was probably some of that frustration as well. But I think there are some takeaways from that, and hopefully we'll be able to highlight a few things this evening that were problematic last year and caused some of those hiccups, and hopefully maybe help you to avoid some of those issues as well. We'll talk about some miscellaneous scenarios, some different things that might impact or come up at some point, either as you're freshmen or as you're moving through college. I will talk about a Dordt-specific form that we have, but even in that, it's a recognition that other schools are going to have other forms, other mechanisms to address some of those miscellaneous scenarios. And certainly, if there's any questions as we go along the way, feel free to raise your hand if there's something you need a little more clarity on. We'll take those as we go, but also be glad to stick around when we wrap up if you've got something that's a little bit more specific to your situation that you just want to discuss. When we talk about financial aid, there's really two broad categories, first of which is going to be merit-based aid. And maybe I just want to step back up a little bit for students, for families, as you're seniors, maybe even juniors, starting to think about what's that college search process going to be like. My encouragement to you is probably to cast a wide net and to be thinking about multiple schools. And you know, maybe you feel like, hey, I've got this dialed in, I've been set, I've been going to go here, and I know exactly this school, they've got the program I want. I'm not saying that's wrong. That is fine. But if you're unsure or you're just trying to explore different things, it's certainly okay, like I said, to cast a wide net and to explore multiple schools. And with that, make visits to those schools as well. Browse their website. Get to know the admissions staff at those schools. Especially as students, when those counselors from Dordt, Northwestern, NCC, Iowa State, other colleges come to visit here at Unity, make an appointment, meet with them, find out what they have to offer. I sometimes will describe, and maybe it's not the best analogy, but when you're purchasing a car or building a house, you will look and test drive more than one vehicle. You will look at more than one floor plan. In the somewhat similar way, as you're looking to consider a college, you want to do that as well. Explore different schools, different types, different programs. What do they have to offer? And yeah, as you're purchasing that car and going to build that house, you're weighing out a lot of things, including cost. Same thing is true when you're considering a school or considering a college. But you're weighing out not just that dollar price, I trust, because there's probably some other things that are deal breakers or that might factor in a little bit more or less as well. So again, cast a wide net, visit with those schools, and as I said, when admissions counselor comes here to Unity, spend some time to visit with them. Especially as students, then when you're visiting with those admissions counselors, whether it's here at Unity or making that visit to a campus, and really where it's practical and feasible, I encourage you to make those visits because that's the best way for you maybe to get a feel for what campus life is like there. And if you can, stay overnight if that's an option. But as you're visiting with that admissions counselor or the admissions team, help them to get to know you. Help them to know what your interests are. What are the things that you're looking to study? What are the things that you're looking to be involved with in college? Because each school is going to do and offer things in different ways in terms of what might be available for grants or scholarships, money that you can potentially earn as merit-based aid. Grants or scholarships, dollars that you won't have to pay back. But these merit-based aid are things that you as a student or as students will earn based on academic achievement, being involved in particular activities. Maybe it's a particular demographic. Some schools might offer scholarships or grants for students where mom or dad also attended that school. Some might offer something for what we would refer to as like a first-generation student, first one from your family to attend college. Or it might be because you come from a certain distance from campus. Just ask and explore about those type of things. When it comes to academic scholarships, find out from that admissions team, hey, I took the ACT, I got a 23 composite, but I feel like I can do a little bit better on that. Well, what's the benchmark that they might have that would say, hey, if you retake the ACT, you've got a chance to increase your academic scholarship. The same might be true on your cumulative high school GPA as well. Although, yes, truthfully, as high school seniors, by that point, your GPA is pretty weighted down. It might be tough to move the GPA very much. But you never know. You might just be on the cusp or right on the threshold of an increase in an academic scholarship. So talk to that admissions counselor. Help them to get to know where you're at. Ask those questions. Like I said, you can browse the website. That's absolutely a great source. But talking to that admissions counselor, having them get to know you and what your interests are. In addition to maybe some of those, what we might sometimes refer to as automatic scholarships. You know, you'll get a scholarship from a coach if you're going to be involved in the volleyball program. You might get a scholarship from the music department if you audition there. You'll get something academically. But you might want to find out, do they have other separate scholarship applications that you might be able to apply for? Do they have a window of time where you can be applying for additional extra scholarships outside of these initial offerings. So watch for those type of things. Again, I've said it once, twice, probably say it a few more times before we're done, but get to know that admissions counselor, have them help them to get to know you, but feel free also to contact the financial aid office as well. They are there wanting to be a resource for you to find out and maybe refer you to different websites, different places, different opportunities that might be available. Typically with merit-based aid, there's not going to be any requirement for a FAFSA or any kind of financial aid application. That's going to be based on academic achievement, that involvement in those programs, those type of things. But also that's a question you want to confirm at the school or schools that you're looking at. Where the financial aid application or a FAFSA is going to come into play then is for what we call those need-based aid. And those are, when we get into the FAFSA, what it's really trying to do is evaluate everybody on a somewhat level playing field, determine what resources are available maybe to the student and to the family, and make a determination about eligibility then for some state aid, potentially some federal aid, different types of programs there. I've mentioned a couple of these, but this is where some of that aid will come from the federal government, maybe through a federal Pell Grant for students or families that would qualify that. There's what's known as the Iowa Tuition Grant, or for students looking to attend a private college in the state of Iowa. For those looking to attend a community college, there's what they call a vocational technical grant. So there are those state aid programs. As an institution, they are going to offer those academic scholarships, those activity scholarships, those alumni awards. But then there's also what we call and refer to as local and regional scholarships, and definitely encourage you there as well. For students, I suspect I would encourage you to connect with Mr. Bima, find out what he's got available. It's not that he has them available, but he's going to be that resource for you of different scholarships that might be available through local businesses. I know for Sioux Center residents, there's a program through our local library. It's called the Postma Scholarships that students can apply for to attend college, to attend the college of your choice. But libraries, banks, hospitals, co-ops, there's a lot of different organizations that will establish scholarships. So you want to be looking for and watching out for those. Also, as we go through the FAFSA and we talk about this, you're going to see that term required contributor, and I just want to pause for a second and touch base on that. Encouragement here is, first of all, for students and families, if you have not already, have that conversation about how is college going to be funded, and recognize that as students and families, that is always a personal family choice and a family decision how you go about doing that. There is no right way. There is not a way that the financial aid office is going to dictate to you and tell you how to do that. That is your personal decision. And every family's decision is going to be different, and it's going to be based on different things. It might be the reality of a tough year financially and some resources that are stretched because of maybe a lost job or lesser hours or medical expenses that are hurting the family and making it difficult to have much extra money to tuck away for college. And other families are going to be in a position where they can help out a little bit more. It is going to be different for each and every family. It is a personal family decision. But when you see that term in the FAFSA that talks about being a required contributor, it's not talking about being required to contribute towards education, but rather it's required to contribute in the sense of providing information into the FAFSA. That was one of those areas that last year would trip some people up, and we'll come across that again here after a little bit, but just want to draw your attention to that. That term required contributor more so refers to you are then required to provide information, submit information on behalf of your son or daughter into the FAFSA. How you go about providing for college is your personal and family decision, and again, would encourage having those conversations, especially as you start going through the college search process, as you start going through financial aid season to help set those expectations for sons and daughters. Watch for deadlines, in particular those local or regional scholarships that I mentioned. You don't want to miss out on something just because a deadline came and went. And I told you I'd say it once again, communicate with the admissions office. Get to know that admissions counselor. When they come here to Unity, stop by and visit with them. Check out into what's new. They're going to be your best voice on campus as well. I will say from our office, I will communicate with them if there's a question that I might have about a student or family to see if they've got any input that they can provide. But also, they're going to be the one that's going to be able to communicate to you when scholarship applications open up, if there's a deadline coming up, and just share new information with you that way. Use them as a resource for you, because ultimately, especially if you're a first-time family going through the search or college financing process, please understand you are not expected to be the expert in all of this. We're not saying we're the experts in all this, but it is what we do. We deal with it on a daily basis, and it's not just at Dort, but it's at every school. There are people in the various offices there to serve as a resource to assist you and help you along. Reach out to them, contact them, communicate with them so that they can assist you in whatever way is needed. As we go through the financial aid part of this, then we talk about, or the question would often get asked, well, what am I going to qualify for? And we're going to get into the FAFSA here in a little bit, but ultimately what that is doing, as I said before, is gathering information about you as a student and as a family to determine how much could the parents potentially, what resources are available there, what resources are there as the student, to develop what we call now a student aid index. This is one of the changes from a couple of years ago that I at least do like a little bit, because they now refer to it as an index. It's a benchmark, it's a metric. It doesn't necessarily represent a dollar figure, although yes, we do kind of use it that way. But it's really an index or an indicator of what resources are available. And yes, I know the question will come up as a parent, hey, we've decided we are not going to, for various reasons, we are not going to help our son or daughter with college education. They're on their own with this. But yet that index is still going to be an indicator. Parent information is still going to be required. But also, even if that means there's a higher index, which maybe means the student's not as eligible for as much aid as they would be if they had a lower index, it's still an indicator that, hey, if there's an emergency situation or suddenly as a student you need to replace a laptop or do something like that, mom and dad might be able to help you out with that. And so again, it's not a perfect metric by any means. I'll share, as I did earlier, I sat in these sessions as a parent several years ago, and the truth of the matter is, then in those days, my wife filled out the FAFSA, so why am I here talking about this now? But I will tell you that whenever she got done with it, I said, nope, that's wrong. There's no way we can pay that. You must have done something wrong. As a husband, don't do that. Don't say that. But I will never say that the FAFSA is the perfect form. But it is the form that we have and that is used by colleges across the country. And so there again, whether you're looking at a community school, state school, or a private college, the FAFSA is what's going to be needed there. For purposes of illustration here, the student aid index, we're just going to say it comes to be $12,000. And I just want to highlight real quickly here community college versus state versus private school and some of those differences and how things might work out. If you're looking at a community college, and I'm just using this sort of as illustration, if that cost is about the same as that SAI, you will probably be able to there qualify for some merit-based aid. They might offer you a small academic scholarship. They might offer a small grant depending on what distance you're coming in from. But they're probably not going to offer much more than that. I mentioned the state vocational technical grant. At a community college, that state grant is $1,200. If you qualify. I'm not even sure really what the benchmark, what the index is to qualify, but that grant is a max of $1,200. Then we look at a state school, say, okay, so now the cost is twice as much. Regardless of the school or schools that you're sending this information to, that SAI is always going to be the same. Well, now you're going to see a bigger gap there. You as a student, as a family, student's going to earn maybe that academic scholarship, and maybe it's going to be a little bit larger than it might be at a community college with those same grades. Maybe they offer a few more incentives or grants or scholarships that you can apply for. But there's a bit more of a gap there, and so maybe they have some additional programs, some additional scholarships that you can qualify for or at least apply for. Chance to close a little bit more of that gap because it's showing a bit of a bigger gap. Then there's a private university, Dordt, Northwestern, Morningside, others. Now again, that cost is maybe double yet. That SAI remains the same. So yeah, do the math, what happens? That need, that gap has really grown. What you will find then is at those private schools, the scholarship offerings for academic scholarships might be larger. You will find that maybe there are larger opportunities available in athletics or music or theater, other areas. You will find that they probably have more and larger awards available through other types of things. I mentioned the state grant a little bit ago. At a community college is $1,200. Percentage-wise, covers about 10% there, potentially. At a state school this current year, the Iowa tuition grant is $8,500 for students that qualified. So it's larger. Again, just a recognition that there's a larger sticker price. I don't share this because I'm here from a private school, but just to really offer the encouragement as you're going through that college search process, as you're casting that wide net and looking at a number of schools, to not think or feel like you should dismiss a school strictly because of the sticker price, but to know that almost nobody ever pays that sticker price. And I'm not going to say that it's going to come down and end up matching your price at a state school or a community college, but it will probably get a lot closer than what you thought it might have when you first started looking at it. And so there again, if I go back to my bad analogy about buying a house or a car, to know that you're narrowing the gap in that pricing, and then it's about weighing out the value and the quality of the program, the living conditions, the location, quality of the programs and activities and different things that you can be involved with. At least you've closed the gap there. Yes, you need to be good stewards of your resources, and so you're probably going to absolutely consider what that bottom line cost is, but at least you've narrowed the gap a little bit. So again, as we think about the financial aid piece of this, definitely encouraging completing that entire process. And so maybe just to talk about that real quick before we jump into the next thing, once the FAFSA does become available and you're able to get that information submitted to schools, they will in turn follow eventually to you with what we call a financial aid award or financial aid offer letter. And what that's going to do on there is then actually list their sticker price, but then it will show you based on the merit aid that you received and any need-based aid that you received through state, federal programs or institutional programs. And then it'll break it down for you and show what your remaining out-of-pocket cost is. So my encouragement is ultimately is just to continue through that process with the school or schools that you're looking at so you get to that point to know exactly what is it actually going to cost you. And so that you're factoring that number in as you weigh that out against, again, considering that along with the quality of the program, et cetera. Okay. Federal Student Aid ID, that FSA ID, this is a username and password. If there is an action item to take away from tonight, it would be for you to go ahead and get this set up sometime here over the next few weeks. We are anticipating at this point that the FAFSA might not be available till 1st of December, but this FSA ID, this username and password, will need to be in place when you start filling out the FAFSA in order to sign in order for it to recognize you, and in order for you to complete those documents. So if there's an action item from tonight, it is to go ahead and get that set up. To students, you will do this linking it to an email address and a cell phone. Make sure you use a permanent email address. If you have one here through Unity, it will likely get shut off after you graduate. So you want to have like a Gmail or an Outlook or Hotmail, something that will be a permanent email address so that you can use this going forward. As parents, same thing, but it also has to be a unique email address. You can't use the same one if you've got a family email address. You and your son or daughter cannot use the same one. Parents, if you, and we'll come back to this again, if you as parents filed your taxes or your status was married filing joint, then really only one of you needs it. But if your taxes were filed separately, then it's possible that you're going to both need an FSA ID. So just be mindful of that, and again, we'll come back to that here in a little bit. Hang on to that FSA ID. You're going to be able to use that. You will need to use it from year to year. Parents, if you've got younger children that start college, then in another 2, 3, 4 years down the line, you will continue to be able to use that same one for them as well. Students will need one, and at least one parent will need an FSA ID. So I encourage you to get that set up here over the next few weeks, because there's about a 3 to 5 day delay. It's called a kind of a confirmation period with Social Security Administration to get that back, to know that it's been officially approved. So just take an opportunity in advance to get that set up. So you'll take that website, you go to the upper right-hand side there, it talks about creating an account. That's going to get in there where you provide some of your private personal information, name, birth date, Social Security number. Then there's going to be a page here where you think of this just like you would if you're setting up some online banking or a credit card. There's going to be some challenge questions there for you to help you be able to retrieve your answer in the future, to retrieve your username and password. You'll link it to an authenticator app, just again as another way to unlock or retrieve or reset that password. It will pretty much intuitively walk you through that process once you get into the site. But again, encourage you to probably go ahead and get that one done here in the next couple of weeks, so that when the FAFSA does release in December, you're ready to go. Anything to this point? We're going to be kind of transitioning now into the FAFSA. As I mentioned a couple of times, the FAFSA, that's going to be that federal online form that's gathering information then about you as students and families. We are anticipating, they're doing some beta testing right now. We anticipate that maybe by December 1st it'll be available if that all goes well. Again, communicate with the schools. As schools, we'll do our best to communicate with families as well to let you know if there's any delays on that and where that status is. The FAFSA is always looking back a couple of years. So for those of you that are seniors or parents of seniors looking to start college in the fall of 25, it is always going to go back and then use your taxes from 2 years prior, the 2023 calendar year. Part of that is because if it does release in December, you don't need to wait for your 24 taxes to get completed. They're doing this largely under the premise that everybody's income remains relatively consistent from year to year. There's a mechanism to address that if it doesn't. Even last year, when we had a lot of families not filling this out until March and April, you still had to go back 2 years and use those taxes. In fact, and we'll see when we get into it, it'll automatically pull that information in for you. But just to be mindful, it is always looking back a couple of years from the school year that you're going into. So for the fall of 25, it will be looking at 2023 tax information. Again, we'll go to the same website as what we did for that FSA ID, but now up in the upper left, there's a drop down there for accessing the FAFSA form. It's going to tell us here, the 25-26 coming soon, the one that you as seniors need for next fall. Continue to go back and check that periodically, but again, at this point, we're looking at or about December 1st before it's available. If you would need to get into the 24-25 form, you could, but we're going to be looking for that 25-26. When you go in to start, you can either start it as a student or the parent. Either way is fine. For purposes of tonight, just to walk through it, we're going to go through it as if the student is beginning it. One of the first things you're going to do when you log in as the student is it's going to give you a quick series of little videos, to call them some sort of onboarding videos, to give you kind of an overview and a preview of some of the information, some of the terminology that you're going to see in there. They're going to talk about roles. What is your role in this process? As the student, you're the applicant. It's your education. It's your future. This is your form. Parents, here's that term again, contributor. You are likely to be considered a contributor where you are needing and required then to provide information to the form. And so as a student, you will need to you will be inviting those contributors to fill out your form. Up until a few years ago, you guys could sit around the kitchen table at night, start filling it out. Student could do their portion and just slide the laptop over. Mom and dad could continue with their part. They've changed this up now partly for some security reasons, but basically the student will begin their portion and in turn invite their parents. It'll trigger an email to mom or dad to then provide information. And that's where that contributor comes in. And I want to talk here too on let's skip ahead and get into this here a little bit. So when you log in, you're going to first of all be able to confirm that name, birth date, social security number. So you've logged in now using that FSA ID that you've set up. You set up that FSA ID hopefully here in the next week or two. By the time the FAFSA is available in December, January, you're going to log in. It's going to identify you. You get into the form. All this information should match. Just take a quick glance at it when you get in, just to make sure you got your right name, birth date, social security number pulled through there. If your address is changed, if you end up moving, you're going to have an opportunity in those fields to update that. Then one of the big things that's, I mentioned security reasons here a little bit ago. A big part of it is what they now call the direct data exchange from the IRS site, an exchange of data from the IRS site into the Department of Ed and to your FAFSA. As students and parents, you will be, again, required to provide consent for that direct data exchange. And it's really for two reasons. Number one, giving your permission for the IRS to share that tax record with the Department of Education. But also, within that language in there is providing you some of the guidelines that we as schools will be required to abide by and how we use that information. We are very limited in what we can do with that. It can be only for the purposes of helping and to calculate your financial aid. So by signing and providing that consent, yes, one, you're giving permission for that info to come in, but two, it's also acknowledging that you understand that as a school we're going to be limited in what we can do or how we can share that it is solely for financial aid purposes. See here a few of the different sections that are there in the FAFSA. Once we get past that introduction, then we get into what we call personal circumstances. And this is where we determine what we call dependency status for financial aid. Are you a dependent or independent student when it comes to financial aid? Number one, just to know that this is different than the definition that the IRS uses. So if as a parent you say, hey, my son or daughter, they've been filing their own taxes for the last couple of years now, that really doesn't matter. Or vice versa. If they're on your tax return, is it what automatically makes them dependent? It's about, are they 24? Are they in the military? Are they married? What type of degree are they working on? Those are the things that are going to determine are they dependent or independent. There are and can be exceptions, and we'll talk about some of those after a bit, but typically high school seniors are likely to be considered dependent, and that's how we're going to kind of continue along with this process this evening. There are those then unusual circumstances. And here too, this was an area that they hoped to clean up the language on the form this year, but it did trip up a lot of people last year, and it kind of is tied to what we talked about earlier as far as that required contributor. Required to provide information. Different than, or let me put it this way, as parent, if for the student they are unable to get their parents' information, that's an unusual circumstance. If a parent is unwilling to, that actually puts the student in a difficult spot because it will make them ineligible for some of the federal grants. In fact, the only thing they can have access to then is an unsubsidized or an interest-bearing loan. So just to be mindful of when it talks about the question about, will your parents provide information? You are, as a required contributor, should. If for the student, and well, we'll just hold off because we're going to get to that question here in just a second. Maybe just to touch base on here. One of the other things that's going to end up on this part here, and that's where I maybe reference you a little bit to that ICANN, that other sheet that you grabbed when you came in the door. There's some information on the backside that talks about which parent or parents need to be providing information. This here is if both parents are in the home married, okay, it's going to be maybe a little bit more straightforward. If parents are separated, The terminology now is to use the parent that has provided the most support in the past year. Typically, that may be the one that you've been living with, but then also any step-parent if they are remarried. But there's actually a helpful guide on that other sheet. And actually, when you get into the FAFSA itself, they have, I think what they call it, kind of a, I won't have the right name for it, but it helps to determine who, as parents, should be reported and included in the form. So we're going to get into these personal circumstances, just some quick basic questions for the student. If they're single, up across the top of the screen you see the different sections of the form, just serves as a little pulse of how far you're moving along through the form. There's going to be a question about, and now keep in mind these screenshots are going to be from last year's form because we don't have next year's yet. So where it says when the student begins, when you get into it and it's actually updated, it'll say when the student begins the 25-26 school year, what will your college grade level be? And these questions are there for a reason as well, because this is what determines what you're eligible for in terms of some student loans. And certainly understand that's the last piece that you're going to try to use, but it is important to get that in there and get that correctly. And then there's a question at the bottom of the screen there that says when the student begins what will be the 25-26 year, will they have their first bachelor's degree? And this is where just want to highlight to read the question carefully, to watch for exactly what time frame are they looking at or talking about, because obviously as students, if you're able to fill this out in December or January, you do not have yet, well, this is the question about bachelor's degree. You certainly don't have that. My apologies on that. We'll come back to that one here in a little bit. I was thinking we were in a different section here. Student personal circumstances, those are some of the ones I highlighted earlier. This is the one on unusual circumstances, and the way the question is phrased. Do unusual circumstances prevent the student from contacting their parent, or would contacting their parent pose a risk to the student? That's the unusual circumstance that would allow a student to check yes if it's going to likely cause them harm or danger, and then the school will likely reach out and communicate, get some additional documentation or some background. But for the purposes of this, we're going to say, yep, the parent can be contacted. Parent does need to then provide information, because here's that question about the unsubsidized loan only. If the parent does not provide information, if they are available and unwilling, then the student would have checked yes here, but then the only thing that they can get is that unsubsidized or that interest-bearing loan. So the question being, are the students unwilling to provide their information? No. We're going to get that from mom and dad. As we move into the form, and this was an area that really caused some people to get tripped up last year, and I hit on it a little bit earlier when it comes to setting up the FSA ID. Students, you're going to get one set up. Parents, keep in mind, it's going to be looking back, asking for your tax information, or it's going to import your tax information from the IRS for the calendar year 2023. If, as parents, your tax filing status was married filing joint, then only one parent should get reported here. And that's actually, I think some of this end up kind of getting blurred out. Hopefully maybe it shows up a little bit better on your sheets. While it looks like at a glance you should list both parents, if your tax filing status was married filing joint, only list one parent and list the parent that set up the FSA ID. Unfortunately, with some poor language around this last year, we had a lot of families that would put mom and dad both in there because it looks like they should. And then there was concern, well, now we're both getting an invite. Does this mean our taxes are getting, our income is getting reported twice? And then that actually crashed the system for a little bit because not everybody was getting that second invite and just became problematic. If you filed married filing separately, yes, then both parents should get listed. But if you submitted your taxes in 2023 as married filing joint, then only list one parent at this spot, and it should be the parent that has the FSA ID. And that reason will get to become clear here in just a little bit. As the student's going through, then there's going to be some demographic questions about race and ethnicity, parent education. I mentioned earlier, first-generation scholarship. Different schools might offer different things if you are the first one in your family to go to college. Some will have that definition be even if mom or dad attended college but they didn't get their degree, we might offer a first-gen scholarship. Each school will set that up differently. This is the question I was going towards a little bit ago. What will the student's high school completion status be at the beginning of 25-26 when you guys are doing this in December, January, February? Obviously, at that point, you will not yet be a high school graduate, but read the question, look at the time frame they're asking. And again, when you get into the updated form, it's going to be asking, will you be a high school graduate when next fall starts? And so then you need to be able to check yes. The reason for that is you can only be, or you, put it this way, you are ineligible for federal financial aid if you do not have a high school diploma, GED. You need to be a high school graduate in order to be eligible for federal aid. And so, even, again, just reading the question carefully, they are asking, by next August, will you have that? You check yes. What that does also then to the schools that you send the FAFSA to, they will know then where to expect that final transcript to come from. And if they don't have a final transcript for you on file by June or July, we'll have that FAFSA data then for them to know who to contact and to make sure that they're getting that transcript to make sure that you are eligible for financial aid. You need to provide that high school information, name, and there's a search feature here you can plug in. So for example, here you'd put in Iowa, you could put in Orange City, and they would probably pull up both MOC and Unity and give you those couple options, and you just select the one that's correct. When we get into the student financial section, again, we're still kind of working through the form on behalf of the student. You will have checked that direct data exchange. Now, I also understand that a lot of high school students maybe will not file taxes, depending on what you earned over the past year or in any given year. Maybe there was no income tax withheld, there's nothing to get refunded to you, and that's okay. But remember that direct data exchange, you will still need to provide consent, because even though there's nothing from the IRS to pull over, you will be providing or acknowledging then what we as a school can or cannot do with that information, and then you'll be able to go ahead and enter in some of that information manually. And then I plugged in that note there about 9,400 that is protected. That number, that's last year's number. That number will probably go up a little bit this year. Ultimately, just sort of as a plug, the FAFSA is not out to get you on everything that you put in there. It's really recognizing that students, we want to encourage them to be out working, getting a job in the summer, earning some money to help cover some miscellaneous expenses. And so I suspect that number this coming year will be closer to about $10,000 that will be protected. So if you file taxes, this information will import automatically. If you're filling it in manually, you will still go ahead and report. If you've got W-2s from a couple of employers, just go ahead and plug that information in there. But then as they do their calculation in the FAFSA, they will automatically deduct $9,400 or more out of that. And so, again, not everything is necessarily getting calculated into that SAI for you as a student or as a family for that matter. There will be questions in here. Okay, we'll step through here, the finances. There will be questions in here about student assets. Typically the one about cash savings and checking. Caution here on this one is you are to report as a student what you have in the bank the day that you're filling out the form. Just the timing, again, piece on that one. There are questions there as well for students about net worth of their business and farm, typically not applicable to students, but they ask them anyway. Same thing for investments. We'll talk about those a little bit more when we get to the parents. Then what good does all this information do if it doesn't go anywhere? Well, this is where we get to section 4 that talks about selecting schools. Remember earlier I said go ahead and cast a wide net. You could actually have this FAFSA information sent to up to 20 schools right out of the gate. You don't need to select 20, But if you've got 3 or 4 or 5, 6 schools that you're weighing out and considering, go ahead, get it sent out to them. Even if you haven't applied to them yet, that's fine. If you send it to them, that might trigger them to reach out back to you and say, hey, you've shown some interest. We received your FAFSA. Would you like to fill out an application? And that's okay. You're still not obligated to. But get it out to as many schools as you think you might even be interested in. Even if you've got 2 or 3 that you've never visited, or you've got a few out there that would be kind of your dream school, nothing lost. Go ahead and plug it in there. You've got 20. If you put in 4 or 5 or 6 of them and you get to February and March and now there's another school that comes on your radar, you hadn't heard about them before, you can go back in the form and add them in there. And they'll have that information then within a couple days as well. They do ask that you report it either by name or what we call school code. I had included on that earlier screen for Dort, but every school has a 6-digit federal school ID. Typically, families or students don't know those codes, so you can do this just like you did with the high school. You can do a search. So I'll sometimes use the example, well, for here, let's say you plugged in Iowa and typed in Sioux City. It would pull up for you Witt, Morningside, Briar Cliff. And then you could select the school or schools that you wanted to get sent to. Again, you're not obligated to put in 20. If you know it's only going to be one, plug that in. By the time you're returning for your sophomore, junior, senior year, you're probably just plugging in that one. But just know that you can send it to multiple. Okay. Then as a student, you're almost done with your part of this. Finally, you're going to get a chance to log in there, or you are logged in, but you'll be able to go back to each and every section of the form and review the information that you plugged in, double check your answers, just make sure that you didn't key in anything mistakenly, and go through that section by section as you wish. And then you finally get to that signature part there at the bottom, which again is just going to be some more legal language, but basically it's you saying, I confirm to the best of my knowledge that the information I put in here tonight is true and accurate, something like that. And that you understand how all that information can and will be used. But again, your part of it is not yet, your part is complete, but the FAFSA is not yet complete. You're going to then get sort of a confirmation page there that says, hey, you're almost there. One of those screens that you check is verifying or double checking who should be invited as a contributor. So once you've completed this now, you've signed it off, you've submitted it, that's going to initiate then an email to your parent, to the one that you listed as a contributor, required contributor, required to provide the information. So then the parent will receive an email. Student's portion is done. Now mom or dad, whoever you had listed in there on that other page, will receive that email and say, hey, you have been listed as a contributor on your son or daughter's FAFSA form. And so then you as a parent will have that opportunity to log in right from that link right there using, again, your FSA ID. So that's why you want to be able to have that in place and get that set up. They will walk you through that same onboarding process. They will talk again about why you are listed. What does it mean to be a required contributor? And just to help you understand why it's important that you do provide your information. You will also be required to provide consent for that direct data exchange. So just see a couple of screenshots here. Been invited, wants your help on a FAFSA. It'll answer a few of those questions, which you can glance through as you work your way through the form. Once again, be able to confirm that you logged in correctly, that the information you got plugged in there, this is your name, birthday, social security number. And as I said, then you, again, as a parent, will also be required to sign or provide consent for what we call that direct data exchange of information from the IRS into the FAFSA form. There's going to be a few quick questions then about parent demographics. Work your way through the form there. With the parent financials, want to spend a little bit of time on this. Again, that direct data exchange, it's always going to be looking back at 2023, well, 2 years back, so in this case, 2023. You're not going to see that information flow into the form, but you can know that And again, this is part of the security and why they're having you log in separately, that it's identifying you, it's going to link with you once you provide consent, it's going to link to your tax records and automatically import that information so that when it gets to schools, your tax data, the items that are needed will be showing up in there. I think we'll maybe, step ourselves through this here a little bit. There's going to be a question in there about family size. So it is now also importing from your 2023 taxes the number of dependents that you reported on the form then. If, since that time, since you filed your taxes, you maybe had a son or daughter that's gotten married, they're no longer in the house, your family size has changed, you can update that on this page. It's going to ask you a question about the number in college, and this is sort of a trouble spot in some ways. They no longer factor that number in college into how they calculate your SAI, but they do provide this question so that schools will have that information. And then it's ultimately up to each school if they want to take that into account or if they want to be able to consider that. So again, while they've shrunk the FAFSA now to about a third of the questions that it used to be, and there's different and lesser questions being used to calculate that SAI, please know, though, that every remaining question is there for a reason. And the question here about number in college, while it's not factored into the calculation, it is designed to give them the school so that the school can have that information if that's something that they want to consider. Then we get into some of those questions about assets. I just want to spend a second here. Again, it's about a timing thing. It's as of the day you are filling out the form. What do you as a parent show in cash savings and checking? And while I pause a little bit when I say this because I don't want to come off sounding like, yeah, he's trying to provide a way to work around the form. No. But if you have just remodeled your kitchen or you need to reshingle your roof and you've got a significant expense there, would it make sense to pay off that bill before you fill out the FAFSA? Yeah, probably. If that's a sizable bill, you want to shrink what you're reporting for cash savings and checking. But I would also caution you not to overthink that one because remember, it's one data point out of all the calculations. So it may or may not even make a difference at the end. And how do you know? It's tough to say sometimes, especially first year filling out a form. So is there some wisdom maybe to making those extra payments and getting and reducing what you've got in cash savings and checking so that you're reporting less? Possibly, but again, don't overthink it. The cash savings and checking that a student reports, 20% of that is going to be counted to their SAI. So if they report $1,000 in savings, that's $200 that's going to go towards their SAI calculation. For a parent, what you report in there, it's usually more like 3 to 5% because there's a recognition you've got living expenses, you've got mortgage and utilities and groceries and insurance and all of these things. So there's much less of a percentage factoring into your SAI calculation. So again, don't overthink it because it's only one piece of the puzzle, but just want you to be mindful of that. And I share it this way only because if you're planning to make that payment on this the first of next month, then just either make the payment today or wait till you've made that payment and then fill out the FAFSA then. Again, it may be inconsequential, but if you're planning to make some significant payment and reduce your cash savings and checking amount, yeah, then there may be wisdom in waiting. But again, don't over-analyze that one. A couple of the tough and difficult questions that they've changed in this past year. The next one here about net worth of business and farm. If your AGI is less than $60,000, then the investments value of those do not need to be reported. But otherwise, you will now be required to report the equity in those programs, or excuse me, in those items. Buildings, land, equipment do need to now be reported. There used to be an exemption for that. I will share that there are a number of senators, other legislators in the state of Iowa that are working hard to try to get this changed for future years, but it's not going to likely happen yet on this cycle, because they recognize farm values, small business owners throughout the Midwest to probably be more negatively impacted than the nation as a whole. So there are some, like I said, some legislators that are working to get an exemption put back in there for small businesses, family farms, those type of things, but probably not going to be in place this cycle. Ultimately, they want to get a couple years of data, last year's and maybe this year, and hopefully that'll get looked at again. Then there's a question as well about net worth of investments, including real estate. Throughout all of these questions, and again, I'll refer you to that sheet that you picked up at the door from ICANN, the Iowa College Access Network. On the backside, right-hand column, there's a great listing of what does or does not need to be reported, what is and is not reportable assets. You do not report the value of your home, but if you have a rental property, you need to report your equity in that. And again, it's your equity. To that I would always, or the terms that are used is always fair market value minus any debt that you have against it. You do not need to report any retirement funds. These are items that you cannot readily access to use for education. So IRAs, Roth or traditional, any other retirement funds do not need to be reported. But if you've got some other mutual funds, something that you could liquidate, that would need to be included there. Okay, so just be mindful of that. Like I said, that on the back page of the ICANN sheet is just a great resource for this. Then, as the parent of record that is filling out the FAFSA, the one that set up the FSA ID, if you were a married filing joint tax filer, this is then where you will report your spouse's information. And this is then to allow that information to be in there so they can take it back, link it up with the IRS and say, okay, yep, this accounts for both of them. And so it's kind of a clumsy thing as we go through it, which is why earlier when we were looking at that screen that had the big yellow blotch in there, you only report one parent. Because, again, if you are married filing joint in your tax return, you only report one parent there, and then that should be the one with the FSA ID, and then the other parent gets reported at this point in the screen. So again, that they can match that up with your joint tax return and say, okay, now we've got both filers accounted for here. They will not get triggered with an email. They do not need to provide anything more. It's just getting their name in there to match that up with tax forms. That could be the same email, just one that they can be reached at. Question is about, could that be the same email or should it be a different one? Because at that point, it's just a contact information, not to try to link it up to anything. Okay, good, thank you. Okay, then as the parent, you're going to finish this up. You're also going to have that chance to go through the different sections, double check your answers, review what you put in there, and then get to that signature page as well where you agree that to all those terms and conditions and understandings. Once you've gone through it as a parent and you've completed that as well, who gets triggered the email? It's going to be the student, because again, remember, students, it's your form, it's your application, your education, your investment in the future. So once mom and dad have completed their part, if you've already done yours, that should trigger almost instantly an email to the student saying, hey, congratulations, your FAFSA is complete. Keep in mind, we went through this form like the student started it, did their part, and then invited their parent to complete it. You can reverse that. That is absolutely fine. But then it would be, let's say, dad starting the form, filling out their information by listing the name, birth date, social security number of the student, who would then get triggered eventually or get invited to fill out the form, provide their information, and then the two pieces would pull through together for that completion status. Okay. Any questions at all about the FAFSA itself? Ton of information, I understand it. Just want to, like I said, draw your attention to some of the questions that we had last year as far as who's parent and what should be reported when and those type of things. Yes? You signing that or providing consent for that direct data exchange will initiate that. And so you will actually probably not even see any of that information pull into there. Yep. So the question about was anything else that needs to be done, but it's just really going to be providing consent for that direct data exchange, and then it will pull that through. The only financial questions that you really answer are those ones that we looked at about cash savings and checking and investments, because the rest of that is really kind of happening behind the scenes, provided you provided consent. Okay? Also, correct. It's always going back. The year that the school year starts, it'll go back 2 calendar years. So fast forwarding, assuming you're filling this out for somebody that's starting the college in the fall of 25, when they're going back for their sophomore year in 26, then it's going to take this year's tax information. Yes? Great question. That question is about the real estate values. That's, again, the phrasing of the question, but it's actually, that's current as of the day you file. And then what we refer to as fair market value minus any debt that might be against it. But that's as of the day you file. It's the income and tax information where they go back a couple of years. The asset information is as of the day you file. And then, of course, there were some of those questions in there about marital status or of the student or, completion of high school degree and that type of thing. That's looking ahead to the following year. Okay. Yes? Yes. Question is about going back in to finish it. In the past, then you may remember they had you set up like a save key or something like that. You don't actually create that anymore, but you can log out, save the information that's there. I think there is still like a 30 to 45 day window after that. It'll be lost. But you do not necessarily have to sit down and complete it all in one setting. If you get interrupted for whatever reason or need to track down some other information, you can always go back to it. Yep. Okay. I want to touch on just a couple of other quick things here. We went through that entire process like a dependent student, someone that's required then to provide parental information. And again, that's determined by those personal circumstances questions that we had earlier. There are difficult situations sometimes where a student might be able to be declared as independent. And again, I say it is usually because of some difficult situation. Perhaps they've been homeless at some point, or they've lost both their biological parents have passed away, perhaps something along those lines. So they've gone through a difficult time. They potentially then can be declared as an independent student. If that is a situation that is encountered, that certainly, again, could, while it doesn't make up for those situations, it can make them eligible for, as an independent student, to be eligible maybe for a little bit more federal or state aid. Just understand then that it is the right and actually the obligation of the financial aid office to gather some information or some documentation on that. One of the other things that makes a student independent is getting married some point during high school, or excuse me, not high school, let's not rush it along, at some point during college. So to your sons or daughters and the students that are here, if at some point during your time in college, you decide that you're going to get married maybe before your junior or senior year, please just leave it at this, is to contact the financial aid office and let them have a conversation with you about how you go about filing your FAFSA. It'll really be about timing of when you fill it out, but also then at that point you are an independent student. You're no longer inviting your parents as a contributor, but instead you're inviting your fiance or spouse to be the contributor. But don't want to bog you down on the details on that other than it happens. I probably speak to 24 couples a year at Dordt that get married. The MRS degree is a real thing. And that's great, but just if you find yourself in that situation, please reach out to the financial aid office at your school to just get a better handle on how you should fill out the FAFSA for that following year. Also want to draw your attention to a term that we call verification. This is a Department of Education process, like the term implies. It's just designed to verify some information in your FAFSA. If you get flagged for verification, it doesn't mean you did anything wrong. It doesn't mean that there's anything suspicious about what you've done there. It is just part of their regular system of checks and balances to require us as an office to verify or confirm the information that you plugged in there. It might be as simple as you listed 5 members in your household. We just need a signed sheet from you that gives us their names, their birth dates, and are they in school. Last year, with all the changes to FAFSA and the delay in all of those, we probably had less than 5 students flagged for FAFSA. But historically, it's been more in that 10 to 20% range. So significantly more. I don't know where that'll land this year, but just want you to be mindful of that if that does happen, you get flagged for verification, don't be alarmed. Doesn't mean you necessarily did anything wrong. It's just part of their regular confirmation process. If you submitted your FAFSA to 10 different schools, that verification is selected by the Department of Ed, not by the schools. So then you will get contacted by all 10 of those schools asking you to complete the verification process. If by that time you've eliminated half of those schools, you do not need to worry about the verification process at those. If you are flagged for verification as a school, what it means is we got to get that documentation from you, and we cannot issue any financial aid to you until this is complete. If you've decided that at schools 6 through 10 you're not going to enroll there, there's no need, no reason, don't worry about filling it out there because you're not worried about them providing you any financial aid. And then I want to talk a little bit about unusual circumstances in a little bit of a different way. If you are filling out the FAFSA, the question was here about, the tax data and coming in from 2023. And I said earlier, it's based under an assumption that everybody's income remains relatively consistent from year to year. Certainly we understand that that doesn't always happen. Farm economy, small businesses, things can vary that way. Maybe, 2023 you were working somewhere, put in a ton of overtime and got a large bonus, but that's not going to happen this coming year. If you are filling out the FAFSA and you say, you know what, they're going to pull that 2023 income, but that doesn't reflect where we are as a family anymore. Or if there's something else as you're going through the form that you say, that's not where we are today, things have changed. Please reach out to the school or schools if you're still at that stage looking at multiple schools. Contact the financial aid office. There is a mechanism that allows us to address that. It's referred to as professional judgment. It will be done differently by every school, but it does give us a little bit of latitude to try to reflect where you are as a student and as a family currently, not where you were in 2023. If income has changed, relevant example here this year for the flooding that we saw in the area, particularly Rock Valley, Hayward, and Spencer, other places that were really impacted by the flooding, and families were devastated in different ways through that, or go back a few more years. I know we try to put out COVID-19 out of our mind, but through the pandemic, there were a lot of families, especially around the country, that were impacted in different ways. It is right and it is appropriate for the school to look at your situation. And again, professional judgment is specific to the school. So each school, if you're looking at multiple, may request different documents. They may have different requirements from you. Part of how we recognize that at DORT is through what we call our supplemental data form, an SDF. But other schools, as I said earlier, are also going to have something similar. Maybe they call it a special circumstances form. Maybe they call it an appeal form or something like that. But if you find yourself in that difficult situation of, hey, this FAFSA doesn't reflect where we are. This is, and I've said it earlier, right? The FAFSA is not the perfect form, but it's trying to, as much as possible, evaluate everybody on a level playing field. But sometimes you don't fit the boxes that are on the form. Ask the financial aid office, contact them to find out, do they have a special circumstances or an appeal form or something like that. In addition to those type of things, where we also use that at DORT is to gather information about younger children in private K through 12. Now, as we move forward, even all the more, ESAs are going to change that, we understand. But also, if you have out-of-pocket medical expenses, there's a little bit that's factored into the form. But if you've had a really tough year with some medical situations or something that's ongoing that's impacting you financially, sharing that. There is that number in college piece that we talked about earlier as well. The FAFSA is collecting that data. So we as a school are going to know if you as a family have more than one student in college. But it's not calculating that at all in the SAI. We ask families or allow families, invite them on the SDF to report education expense for those other children, just to give us another data point to be able to help factor that in. Each school, again, is going to do that differently. So again, it takes us back to the beginning, right? Work with the school or schools, contact them, help them to know about your situation, what you're interested in as a student, but it's also appropriate as families as well to share, hey, we've got another child in college elsewhere, and that's been a stretch for us, but now we're going to have two. We're not sure how we're going to do this. Yeah, schools are going to be limited in what they can do and what they can offer, but at least making them aware of that situation and see once what their policy is and how they're handling those type of things. So as we wrap up, yeah, you've got that ICANN checklist, a lot of great information on there. I referenced a few of the different items, but there's some other things that are in there as well. Watch for deadlines. As I said earlier, you hate to miss out on something just because the deadline came and went, especially when it comes to those local or regional scholarships. Most of those probably start opening up after the holidays, once we get into January. But also schools, as I said earlier, finding out what other application windows, periods do they have. No, this is not a DORT event, but just to use that as an illustration, we have right now until December 1st is any student that's been accepted for admission next year is able to be applying for additional scholarships. Some of those are specific to their majors, some of them are a little bit more general in nature, some are in the area of leadership. But just to know that those things are available, when is the deadline, so that you go ahead and get those things submitted in time. And yeah, said it once, twice, or a few more times, communicate with the school. They are your best resource. Make those visits. Talk to them when they come to on site here as well. And yeah, again, great to see a number of students here tonight because it is really your education, it's your future, so glad to have you be part of it, but also certainly as parents. You've got your role in this as well, most definitely, to help and provide some information and be part of that process with them. And so yeah, just hopefully this has been helpful for you to maybe take a little bit of the anxiety out of the process. Don't know what the whole answer is other than make those visits, talk to the schools, and again, anticipating the FAFSA to be available somewhere around December 1st. So in advance of that, get that FSA ID set up so you're ready when it becomes available. And then go ahead, get those FAFSA submitted, sent off to the school or schools that you're considering. And each school is probably going to have a little bit of different timeline in terms of when they get information out to you. Our expectation is if they do release it in December and we start actually getting FAFSA data to our office by middle of December, our hope is to start rolling some of that information out to students and families in early January. And I suspect this year that's probably where most schools are going to be, just given the calendar and the holidays and where everything lines up. But again, communicate with the schools to find out what their time frame is on that as well. With that, I'll wrap it up. Like I said, I'll be glad to stick around here for a little bit if you have any questions about anything in general or more specific to your situation. But again, thanks for your time. I know it took a little while tonight. There's a lot to cover, but also the offer is absolutely there, regardless if you're looking at DORT or elsewhere. If you have a question when you get into the form, not exactly sure, hey, what did we talk about there? What did he say about that? Definitely, please feel free to reach out to me. All right, thanks everybody.